Hello everyone, my name is HayysterHaze and welcome back to the disturbing true stories of the web. As always, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button for more interesting and troubling topics. Thanks guys. Everyone knows the story of Jack the Ripper, but no one knows it truly like this. Jack the Ripper traumatized London in the year 1888, and he would go around and actively murder female prostitutes, but he would do it in the most unusual manner possible. The killer almost only had a substantial knowledge of the human anatomy, especially when it came to the female anatomy. All of Jack the Ripper's killings took place within a mile of each other, and so much that no one was ever able to discover him because of how he planned out his activities. All of his killings, of which case there were 5 of them, took place near Whitechapel district in England. They went from, believe it or not, just August 7th to September 10th in 1988. There were also 7 other murders that were like Jack the Ripper's case, but none of them could be properly identified as him. During the time of Jack the Ripper, he would often send out letters to police stations taunting them of his activities and what may come next for these murders. These letters often caused speculation among the murders that happened henceforth. The name Jack the Ripper originates from a letter that was sent to the local police department, mocking them of the certain trials. Despite countless investigations of Jack the Ripper through multiple different police organizations, he was never actually truly discovered and no arrests were ever made. Not only that, but his motive is still unknown. They don't know why he went forth and killed these 5 different girls. Various theories came forward about Jack the Ripper's identity and who he was. Some believe that he was a Victorian painter, and others believe that he may have belonged to some of the richest people in England, but no one was ever able to discover or find out. Since 1888, more than 100 suspects have been put forward and tried to discover who this person was, but it only added to the folklore that was Jack the Ripper. Another name for Jack the Ripper was the Whitechapel Butcher. In the late 1800s, the Whitechapel district in London was viewed with either utter contempt or compassion. Despite being an area where Jews and Russians who came to London to seek a new life could start a business and raise a family, it was often throbbed with gangs and gang violence. Prostitution, which is what Jack the Ripper would often seek after, was illegal only if it caused a domestic disturbance among the public. In London, there was more than 1,000 different brothels, each with selling sexual activities to the public for low costs. At the time, the death or murder of a working girl was often never reported in the news or any other such activities because of it being a polite society. The truth of the matter was that if you were having a ladies' night, it would often call for more gang violence and possible death, so you would never want to go out on your own. Among these more common and violent crimes was a prostitute named Emma Smith who was violently raped with an object by multiple gang members. However, these killings that began in 1888 stood out greatly from the most of the other killings because how particular he was with killing people. In this case, I'm talking about Jack the Ripper. It was almost as if he was marked by a more sadistic additive to these killings, seeking out these women and terminating them for who they are and what they did. Jack the Ripper didn't just take the life of these people, he absolutely mutilated them by taking their kidneys and their organs and their uteruses out of their body. Jack the Ripper's murders suddenly stopped with no answers to come, and because of this, London's people wanted answers, but they never got them. Even more than a century later, Jack the Ripper is still known to this day of his actions of which he taken place, in so much that has inspired books and movies of people who tried to solve the case and tell these people's stories. For over 120 years now, Jack the Ripper's story has been told for a very long time and will probably be talked about for even longer, for many years to come. Thanks, guys. It can be argued that every serial killer is relatively sadistic, but this one set forth many movies because of his actions. Ed Gein, also known as the Butcher of Plainfield, was always someone who was a little bit off. His school teachers always said that he had strange mannerisms, like suddenly laughing out loud to supposed jokes that he was thinking of in his head. His school teachers often blamed his mother because his mother would punish him for making even the most remotest of friends. Because that, for the most part, his childhood was relatively solitary. He wouldn't talk to anyone and he would keep to himself, working on his family farm. Aside from his penalizing social life, his mother would often ensure that he was contained within the family farm, insomuch that he was never able to leave, so all he could do was work and maybe even play with his younger brother. His mother would often preach to him and read from the Bible, and always talk about how the world was inherently evil and that all women were prostitutes, and that things such as simple drinking was instruments of the devil. When Gein was just 38 years old, he was working actively in the farm with his brother. They were burning away marsh vegetation in order to expand the farm, which also just so happened to have been a common practice. But then the fire just so happened to have gotten out of hand, and it spread throughout the entire farm until it was finally put out. And then Ed reported his brother missing. That very same night, the boy was found dead in the field, and they concluded that he died from asphyxiation. At first, it was believed that he did die from, in fact, asphyxiation, but then investigators determined that he died before the fire had ever broken out. They believed that this happened because they found welts all over the boy's body, indicating that he was beaten. Authorities determined that Ed killed his brother, but there was never enough information to properly incriminate him. Because of that, they were forced to accept that it was an accident. Later on, investigators claimed that Ed was in fact the murderer. After his mother's death, Ed decided to renovate the entire house, but instead of renovating it into a more useful house, he instead decided to absolutely board up every single window in his house. He decided to board up every single room in the house that his mother would often use, and the only ones that he didn't board it up was a room that was off of the kitchen. Everything else was left. While the areas of the house that were boarded up were in pristine condition, other areas of the house went into disarray. He was not a very clean person. Ed lived in seclusion on the farmhouse, and he didn't come out at all to speak with anyone. He actually avoided everyone he could. Because of this, he often indulged in death cult magazines and became infatuated with Nazi cannibalism stories. However, as discreet he has become, he always kept to himself, especially in that farmhouse. In November of 1957, a local hardware store owner had suddenly disappeared without a trace. Bruce Waldron was last seen the previous night when the hardware store was open. But after it had closed, people noticed that the hardware store had remained closed up until the next morning when they were supposed to open. When it remained closed, the deputy sheriff that also had been the store's owner's son decided to investigate. When he entered the store, he discovered that the cash register was open and that there were bloodstains covering the floor. While interviewing Frank, they discovered that Ed had been in the store the night prior, and he said that he would come back in the morning for antifreeze. Investigators decided to reach forward, and they discovered that there was in fact a gallon of antifreeze that was stolen as the last item of the day. Investigators ended up going to Ed's home, and they arrested him on the spot. Investigators believed that they would find Warren's body on the farm, but what they found was absolutely horrifying. There were body parts hanging from the walls, and everything was made out of human skin, including the furniture. There were countless bones that were laying about, both whole and fragmented, and there were even skulls that were posted on bedposts. Authorities found human skin that was upholstering most of the chairs in the house. They found a wastebasket that was made out of human skins, and even leggings made from the legs of one of his victims. They also discovered masks that were made from people's faces, and even a belt that was made out of people's own nipples, believe it or not. They also discovered human lips that were being used as a drawstring for shades. They also discovered a corset made out of a female's torso. Authorities also discovered various other body parts such as fingernails, noses, and the genitals of 7 different women. Authorities also discovered among all this the body of Warren. She was decapitated and her head was in a burlap sack. Her body was discovered to be hanging upside down, and she was gutted exactly the same way as you would gut a deer. Police also discovered the remains of another woman named Mary, who she was also dismembered and disfigured. When the police brought Ed Gein up for questioning, he completely folded immediately and explained everything in detail of what he has done. Ed claimed that he made 40 different visits to local cemeteries in the area. Once there, he would exhume bodies and bring them back to his house for his dissections. He claimed that he did this in a dazed-like state, which is up for debate. Let's be real here. In addition to all this, he also expressed his motives. He claimed that after his mother died, he wanted to be closer to her, so he created these bodies of skin and would wear them around the house in order to appear closer to her. He would then crawl into these suits that he created in order to attach himself to her. Even though that there were countless bodies in his house, he was only charged for 1 murder, and that murder was the owner of the shop. Ed Gein ended up going to trial and he was charged with murder, but the cases were dropped due to reason of insanity, of which he claimed. That being said, the court approved this and he was sent to a mental hospital for the criminally insane. He was later diagnosed with schizophrenia. He ended up being retired once from the hospital because the doctors believed that he was ready to stand trial. But once in trial, he was once then declared mentally insane and was sent back to the mental hospital, where he would stay for the rest of his life. He ended up dying in the mental hospital at the age of 77 on July 26, 1984. Hey guys, thanks for liking the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting and disturbing topics. Thanks guys.